spring of 1983, inside a county extension office in Knox County, Missouri. A soil map hung on the wall behind the agent's desk. It wasn't just a map. It was a decision map. Every farmer in the county knew it, studied it, trusted it, because that map told you where you could build a future and where you couldn't. The best ground was shaded dark, deep soil, black, stable, the kind of land that could grow strong crops year after year without much argument, the kind of land banks liked, the kind of land farmers fought over. Average ground was gray, workable, predictable, not great, but reliable enough. And then there was a section in the northern hills, near the limestone ridges, a patch so light it was almost white. 35 acres, thin soil, rock close to the surface, steep in places. The kind of ground where a plow didn't cut, it bounced. Where rain didn't soak, it ran. Where every year of farming left less behind than the year before. The county extension agent, a man named Howard Pike, had a name for it. He called it Dead Hill. No one argued. That land had been tried, over and over. Different farmers, different years, different equipment, same result: failure. The last man who worked it lasted 2 seasons. He broke more equipment than he harvested grain. And when he walked away, he said something people still repeated years later: "I'd rather dig ditches than fight that ground again." After that, no one came back. Weeds took it. Brush pushed in from the fence lines. Small cedar trees started claiming the slopes. From the road, it didn't even look like farmland anymore. It looked forgotten. The county stopped treating it like crop ground. In the records, it was still there. But in reality, it wasn't part of the system anymore. It had been erased. And then, in March of 1983, someone bought it. A man named Raymond Keller, 46 years old, local, quiet. The kind of man people didn't talk about much because he didn't give them a reason to. He bought all 35 acres of the worst land in the county. He paid $210 an acre, $7,350 total, cash, no loan, no bank. At the same time, good land in that county was selling for nearly $3,000 an acre. Prime ground, bidding wars, multiple buyers. And then, off to the side of those auctions, sat this land, ignored, unwanted, until Raymond raised his hand. That afternoon, the story reached town. It always did. At the feed store, men were leaning on the counter, coffee in hand, talking about equipment, prices, weather. When someone mentioned it, "Did you hear about Keller?" "What about him?" "He bought the hill." "What hill?" Dead Hill. A man named Don Avery, the biggest equipment dealer in the area, heard it and laughed, hard enough to spill his coffee. "Ray Keller just bought Dead Hill," he said. "That's like buying a pile of scrap and calling it an investment." The men around him laughed. A couple shook their heads. One of them said, "Maybe he knows something we don't." Don waved it off. "No," he said, "I know exactly what he bought, and it won't grow anything." For a while, that was the story. That was the joke. The man who paid cash for land nobody else would touch. And if you had asked anyone in that room what would happen next, they would have all given you the same answer: nothing. But they were wrong. To understand why Raymond Keller bought that land, you have to understand what everyone else was doing at the time. Because his decision only makes sense when you see what he chose not to do. In the early 1980s, farming across the Midwest was changing. Not slowly, but all at once. The previous decade had been good, very good. Crop prices had climbed, exports had expanded, land values had risen year after year, and for a while, it looked like it would never stop. Banks believed it, dealers believed it, farmers believed it, so they did what people do when everything seems to be going up. They expanded, they borrowed, they bought more land, bigger equipment, more capacity. Because the thinking was simple. If you're doing well, do more of it. And if the future looks strong, prepare for it. But by the early 1980s, that future had changed. Interest rates climbed fast. Operating loans that once felt manageable became heavy, then heavier. At the same time, commodity prices started to fall. Not all at once, but enough. Enough to squeeze margins. Enough to turn confidence into pressure. And suddenly, the system that had rewarded expansion began to punish it. Farmers who had taken on debt found themselves tied to it. Land that had been worth more each year started losing value. Equipment payments stayed the same. Income didn't. And across counties like Knox, people began to feel it. Quietly at first, then all at once. But Raymond Keller never stepped into that system. Not because he couldn't, but because he didn't trust it. He had seen something earlier, something most people ignored. Raymond was 46 in 1983. He had grown up on a small farm just outside Edina. His father, Lewis Keller, was not a man who chased growth. He chased control. Control over cost, control over risk, control over how long something had to last. He kept machines running far past the point most people would replace them. He repaired instead of buying, adjusted instead of upgrading. And whenever someone talked about borrowing, he always said the same thing. Don't owe the future more than it can give you back. Raymond heard that his entire life, and unlike most people, he kept listening. When his father passed away, he left Raymond 3 things: land, tools, and no debt. No expansion plan, no equipment upgrades waiting to happen, no pressure to become something bigger. Just a farm that worked, and a system that didn't break. Raymond kept it that way. While other farmers bought newer tractors, he kept the old one running. While others added acres, he stayed where he was. While others borrowed, he saved. Every month, $600 into a small account at the local bank. He didn't talk about it, didn't compare numbers, didn't explain himself. He just did it, year after year, through good seasons, through average ones, through years when everyone else looked like they were getting ahead faster. By the spring of 1983, he had just under $40,000, cash, available, no obligations attached to it. And that gave him something most people around him didn't have anymore: options. Because when land came up for sale, most farmers looked at it the same way. How much can it produce? How quickly can it pay itself off? What equipment will it require? And how much do I need to borrow to make it work? Raymond asked a different question. What does this land need to become something better? Not what it is, not what it was. If someone stopped forcing it to behave like everything else. That's why he bought it. Not because it was good, but because it wasn't. Because nobody else wanted it. Because nobody else was competing for it. Because nobody else saw a future there. And because, for the first time in a long time, he didn't have to follow anyone else's pattern. At the feed store, people saw a mistake, a bad decision, a waste of money. Raymond saw something else. Time, space, and control. And what he did next was something no one in that county expected. Because Raymond Keller was not trying to farm that land. He was trying to change it. The first thing Raymond Keller did after buying the worst land in the county was not what anyone expected. He didn't bring in equipment. He didn't call a contractor. He didn't even start the tractor. He walked. Every inch of it, all 35 acres, up the slopes, across the flats, along the edges where the brush had taken over. He walked it the way someone walks something they're trying to understand, not fix. In one hand, he carried a small notebook. In the other, a soil probe, a simple steel tool, one his father had modified years earlier in the workshop. He pushed it into the ground over and over again, different spots, different depths. He wrote everything down, where the soil was thin, where the rock came up too fast, where water collected after a rain, where it ran off completely, where the slope faced south and baked in the summer heat, where it faced north and stayed cooler. By the end of the week, he had mapped the entire piece, not with equipment, but by hand, at his kitchen table. Graph paper, pencil, notes. Line by line, he built a picture of what that land actually was. And once he understood it, he made a decision, one that no one else in the county would have made. He decided not to farm it. Not the way it had been farmed before, because that was the problem. For years, people had tried to force that land to behave like good land. They plowed it, they planted corn, they drove heavy equipment across slopes that were never meant to hold it. And every year, they took something out of it that never came back. The little topsoil it had washed away, down the slopes, into the creek below, leaving behind clay, stone, and nothing to hold either in place. By the time Raymond bought it, it wasn't just unproductive, it was exhausted. But Raymond didn't try to push it harder. He went in the opposite direction. In April of 1983, he started seeding. Not corn, not soybeans, not anything the market was asking for. He planted alfalfa, orchard grass, and a mix of perennial cover. On the flatter areas, he used a basic spreader, but on the slopes, he did it by hand, a canvas bag over his shoulder, walking up and down those rocky hills, scattering seed step by step. While other farmers in the county sat in enclosed cabs, planting straight rows into black soil, Raymond was out there in work boots, throwing seed into ground everyone said was dead. One afternoon, Don Avery drove past in his pickup, slowed down, watched Raymond working the hillside, then drove on. That night, at the cafe, he told the story. "Keller's out there seeding that hill by hand," he said. like it's 1910. Won't make a difference. That ground won't grow anything. But it did. Not immediately, not dramatically, but slowly it did. Because what most people didn't understand was that Raymond wasn't planting for harvest. He was planting for soil. Alfalfa, like most legumes, does something corn can't. It pulls nitrogen out of the air and puts it into the ground, free, year after year. But that wasn't the most important part. The roots were. They went deeper, far deeper than most crops. They pushed through the clay, through the compacted layers that had stopped everything else before. And when they died, they left something behind. Channels, tiny pathways for water, for air, for life. The soil began to change, not on the surface, but underneath it. Raymond didn't harvest that first year. He let everything grow, let it bloom, let it die back naturally. Then he cut it and left it where it fell. Nothing removed. Everything returned. The second year he added something else. Manure. Not in excess, not all at once, just enough, load by load, spread thin, across the areas that could hold it. The nutrients fed the plants fed the soil, and the soil started feeding itself. By the end of the second year, something had changed. You couldn't see it from the road, but if you dug, you could feel it. The ground was softer, darker, holding moisture longer after rain. And something else had come back. Earthworms. Not many at first, but more than before. And that mattered. Because worms only stay where the soil is alive. Howard Pike came out to see it, walked the land with Raymond, took his own samples, dug his own holes. He didn't say much, but before he left, he stood there for a moment, looking across the slope, then said quietly, "This isn't what it was." Back at his office, he updated the file. Same land, same location, different note. Unusual progress. By the third year, Raymond added something else. Movement. Not machines, cattle. A small group, light pressure, moved often, never left long enough to damage the ground. They grazed the grass, returned nutrients, pressed seeds into the soil, and helped complete the cycle. Step by step, without forcing it, the land began to recover. Not because it was pushed harder, but because, for the first time in decades, it was being worked the way it needed to be. And while Raymond Keller was doing all of this, quietly, without telling anyone, the rest of the county was heading in the opposite direction. Fast. By the mid-1980s, what had been building quietly became impossible to ignore. Not on Raymond Keller's land, but everywhere else. Across Knox County, and counties just like it, things began to break. At first, it didn't look like a collapse. It looked like pressure. Bills that took longer to pay. Loans that didn't roll over as easily. Conversations at the bank that lasted a little longer than they used to. Then the pressure turned into something else. Decisions. Hard ones. Farmers who had expanded started pulling back. Those who couldn't started selling. Land went on the market. Equipment went on the market. Some of it came back to the same dealers who sold it. And in a place where success had once been measured by growth, everything started moving in reverse. Interest rates stayed high. Commodity prices stayed low. Margins disappeared. And the numbers no longer worked. Fields that had looked profitable no longer covered the cost of running them. Equipment that once made sense became weight, and debt stopped being a tool. It became the problem. Across the county, you could see it. Not all at once, but piece by piece. A neighbor who stopped planting one field. Another who sold half his herd. Another who didn't come back the next season. Some farms changed hands. Some didn't make it that far. And the places that had once been full started to thin out. In town, the changes showed up differently. The equipment dealership that had once been full of new machines looked quieter. Fewer deliveries, more used equipment, trade-ins that didn't leave the lot. Don Avery saw it every day. He had sold machines to most of those farmers, watched them grow, watched them borrow, watched them expand. And now he was watching them struggle. Some of the equipment he had sold came back, not because the farmers wanted to sell, but because they had to. By 1985, his business wasn't what it had been, not even close. But a few miles outside town, on 35 acres of land nobody had wanted, something else was happening. Raymond Keller kept working, the same way he had been. No changes, no reaction, no adjustments to match what everyone else was doing. Because what everyone else was doing wasn't working anymore. By the fourth year, his soil had changed enough that he tried something new. Not across the entire field, just part of it. The flattest section, the most stable ground. He planted a grain crop into what he had built. No deep tillage, no heavy disturbance, just seed placed into soil that had been rebuilt from underneath. The results were not perfect. The rows weren't even. The stand wasn't thick. From the road, it didn't look impressive. And that's what people noticed. Don Avery drove past again, looked across the field, shook his head. Later, he told people, "Keller's crop doesn't look right. Too thin, too uneven. Told you that ground wouldn't work." But Don was looking at the surface. Raymond was looking at something else, the roots. Because when the heat came, real heat, the kind that dries out a field in days, something different happened. Other fields started to show it. Leaves rolling, growth slowing, stress. Raymond's field didn't. The soil held moisture. The structure held. The roots reached deeper into ground that had been opened year after year. And by the end of that season, his yield was not lower. It wasn't average. It was competitive. On land everyone had written off. Not loud attention, but quiet attention. The kind where people don't say much, but they start watching. Raymond didn't change anything, didn't explain it, didn't try to prove a point. He just kept going. Year 5, year 6. Each year the soil got better, darker, more stable, more alive. Water stayed, erosion slowed. Grass held the slopes, and the creek below ran clearer than it had in years. While other farms were trying to survive the system, Raymond Keller had stepped outside of it. Not by accident, but by design. And by the time people realized what he was doing, it was already working. better than anyone expected. By the time the decade was coming to an end, what had happened on those 35 acres was no longer a question. It was visible. From the road, you could see it. Where there had once been brush, there was now grass. Where there had been exposed rock, there was soil. Dark, soft, holding together. The slopes that used to wash out after every storm held. The creek below ran clearer, not because anything had been added to it, but because something had finally stopped leaving. Raymond Keller didn't talk about it, didn't publish anything, didn't try to explain it. He just kept working. By the 7th year, his land wasn't just functioning, it was producing at levels that matched and in some places exceeded what the county expected from its best ground. And he was doing it with lower cost, less input, less risk. While others were trying to hold on to what they had built, Raymond had built something different, something that didn't depend on price or interest rates or expansion, something that improved the longer it was left alone to work. One morning in the fall of 1990, at the livestock sale barn, 2 men stood side by side watching cattle move through the ring, Raymond Keller and Don Avery. Don didn't speak right away. He watched the sale, listened to the auctioneer, waited through a few lots. Then finally he said something. "I drove past your place last week." Raymond nodded once. "Looks different." Raymond said nothing. Don kept going. "I sold tractors to most of the farmers in this county. Big ones. Expensive ones. I told them they needed more land, more power, more equipment." He stopped for a moment, then said, "Most of them are gone now." Another pause, long enough for the sound of the auction to fill the space between them. Then he looked at Raymond. "You bought the worst land in the county, paid cash, planted grass, and you're still here." Raymond kept his eyes on the ring, didn't turn, didn't react. He just nodded once. Then he spoke. The land was never the problem. A small pause, just enough for the sentence to settle. Then he finished it. The debt was. Nothing else was said. Nothing needed to be. The cattle kept moving. The auction kept going. The day continued, like it always did. And if you drove past that land years later, you wouldn't know the history. You wouldn't see the failure or the years it took to fix it. You would just see good ground. And that was the point. Because the difference was never in the land. It was in how it was treated. And the man who understood that was the one who stayed.